guys, welcome to Table Talk. We are the City Crew. We're going to be touching on the subject of monomyth and the ethics within the different characters.
Followed by some polytheism history, and Pascal's going to talk about Christian theology at the end.
Cool.
Let's
Okay,
go.
first off, we're going to talk about the monomyth that is seen in the movie Avengers Infinity War. So it is actually popularized by Joseph Campbell, and he uses monomyth to describe like heroes like journey, and we can see it in a lot of films, and it actually inspires hope to a lot of people. In the Avengers Infinity War movie, we can see the hero's journey more on the life of the villain Thanos rather than the protagonists, which are the Avengers. It is at this point we can just assume that the Avengers already had their own hero's journey, which was fulfilled in each of their films. And so we first start off at his call of adventure, which is his main mission in this film is to collect all the 6 Infinity Stones so that he can use this to wipe out like half of the universe.
Right.
What really inspires Thanos to do this is that he saw the extinction of his own planet, which is Titan, and that the universe is just overpopulated. And so moving on, we skip the refusal to call and just move on to crossing the threshold. And in this, like we see that he fought off the Guardians of the Galaxy at the planet Nowhere, where he abducts his daughter Gamora.
Yeah.
And here they go to here he collects the Reality Stone, which is he got it from the Collector. And then we move on to the belly of the whale, where he sacrifices his daughter Gamora at the planet Bormir, where the classic Marvel villain Red Skull is guarding like the place. So this is where he got the Soul Stone. And so it's actually like a classic twist in the film, because we see him that he proves that he loves Gamora. And then we just move on that he faced a lot of trials, and where he faced off a lot of the Avengers, and he basically defeats them, like when he was set up by Doctor Strange and Iron Man and a bunch of like the others. And so moving on, he now has the 3 Infinity Stones on his gauntlet, and he has nothing to lose. He goes off and sets off toward the Earth, where the last remaining stone is with Vision. The Earth heroes attempt to destroy the stone to spoil Thanos' plan one last time, and they actually succeeded. But Thanos used the Time Stone to revert back the time, and then he got off like the Mind Stone from Vision. And so in his last-ditch effort, Thor actually used his Thanos killing axe and pushes it into the chest of Thanos. However, Thanos gloats, and he said, "You should have gone for the head." And then he snapped his fingers, and this is where he achieved and completed his ultimate boon, which is like achieving his mission, and he wiped out half of the universe.
Crazy.
And so like at the end of the movie, we actually see him at his at his own home, and then we see him watching the sunset. And we can describe them, we can see that he is a mad and cruel Titan, but for him, he actually really believes that he is giving the universe their future back. So now, what else can we see from this?
So we'll be chatting about the ethics in this movie, and I'm going to talk from the perspective of Thanos that you've brought up already. And what Thanos states in the beginning of the movie is quite interesting. He says, "When I'm done, half of humanity will still exist, perfectly balanced as all things should be." And basically, what he is a utilitarian thinker. So he thinks that in order to save the whole planet, he needs to kill half of the population, right?
Yeah.
So basically, ethics in general is a major theme throughout the entire movie.
Definitely.
So not just
the
utilitarianism.
Avengers take the exact opposite point of view, which makes sense as to why they clash, right?
Yeah.
Why they're enemies.
Yeah.
And that the Avengers take on a Kantian ethics.
Yeah.
They believe that actions and principles have an automatic right or wrong.
Yeah.
That it's not about the consequence, not about the outcome, but they must always do the right thing. So they're all about universal principles and about being fair across the board and specifically valuing human life. So that's why they really clash with Thanos.
Yeah. So they basically clash and they fight him throughout the entire movie. And just to clarify what a utilitarian thinker, how they operate, is basically that they will look at how the morality of an act is determined by the results. So in other words, this theological system does argue that the moral choice is the one that produces the greater good for the greatest number of people. And Thanos in this movie takes it on as his responsibility to make this choice, and he places himself basically as God and as the savior of the universe, and he sees it as his responsibility and his job to decide what happens. And basically what he continues throughout the movie to do is to sacrifice and to kill and to basically do anything he can in order to get these stones, which is him operating out of an ideology of utilitarianism, and he doesn't really seem to be able to think differently, even though his daughters are trying to talk to him, people that are his family, everyone is trying to change his perspective, but he's just so set on one thing. And the fact that even he can kill his own family, his own daughters that he has raised and adopted, says basically a lot about his character, that basically he is the evil character, but somehow he manages to get like the sympathy of the audience, because you see where he's coming from as well, that he's trying to save the planet, but ultimately it is selfish because he wants to save himself and his people first. But he doesn't seem to think like he can't expand his perspective, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting is that Thanos' perspective on sacrifice is so different to the Avengers. And so the Avengers, Marvel really utilizes Kantian ethics to value self-sacrifice. So you see that, and even there, they're a bit hesitant to do it in the first place. Even then, that's still like a bit like, oh, well, it's still human life, what do we do? So an example is 56 minutes into the movie, all the Avengers come together and they're basically trying to figure out how to stop Thanos. Within Vision's anatomy, he actually has the Mind Stone in him. So Vision essentially offers his life, self-sacrifice, and says, you can kill me in order to save trillions of people. But Captain America's immediate response is,
we don't trade lives, Vision.
which really says a lot about the way he thinks, and it shows his convictions that killing, no matter what, is wrong. But self-sacrifice is actually okay. And so we kind of question, well, why didn't they just do that 56 minutes into the movie? Well, because from Captain America's perspective and the other Avengers' perspective is they hadn't exhausted all the different options yet. So self-sacrifice is essentially okay within the Avengers, but it's very different from Thanos.
Well, basically, like the whole movie features supervillains and titans, and they're all sacrificing for what they perceive to be the greater good, right? And Thanos is not willing to sacrifice himself. Like that's not even an option in the movie, and who knows what would happen if you were to consider that, you know? And what is interesting though is that this is a modern film, right? And modern film nowadays tends to avoid the extreme contrast between what is evil and good, and bad and good. And that is basically also reflecting how we now tend to think, oh, well, who has the answer to what is right and wrong? And the movie's kind of touching on that, because as you're watching, you're kind of obviously realizing that by killing half of the population is wrong, but somehow Thanos makes it seem like it is the only way. And he kind of makes you believe him for a second. And that is what is confusing about his character, because you agree with him, but then you don't. And that's because of the Avengers and the way they argue that no, that's not an option, that there is another way, right?
Marvel's really clever in the way that they critique these ethics. So in Infinity War, I would say that they actually critique Kantian ethics by saying,
well, as Jen had already said, at the end of the movie, the Avengers lose. They're the heroes. They're the ones who are deontologists. They have principles. They have clear thinking compared to Thanos, but still they lose. So it's almost as if they're presenting Kantian ethics as this thing that's like, great, Captain America would have been right if he lived in an ideal world. But the world is not ideal. We don't have perfect, optimistic situations in life. It's very evil and twisted and confusing and very complicated. But this is a bit of a spoiler alert.
in Endgame, Marvel actually turns that around and actually does affirm deontologists.
Because if we look at the probability of, what did Dr. Strange say? 1 in
14,605,000.
You get one chance to do this right, and so for a deontologist, they just think, cool, I just need to do the right actions because right is right, wrong is wrong. Compared to utilitarian, where it's like, well, the consequence, is what's right, but how do we know what the right action is for the consequence? And so it actually turns it around, and because they kept doing the right thing, the Avengers won in the end. End of Endgame, Thanos loses, dies, they restore order, whatever you want to call it. So I think it's really interesting that they basically say, the we don't trade lives ethics is the ethics of superheroes, and we love superheroes. So Marvel's saying a lot.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So yes, definitely. So Thanos is obsessed with death, and he is so obsessed about balance and restoring the universe that he is basically painting a very bad picture of ethics, and is displaying a bad use of utilitarian ethics. Hey?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that was ethics, and now we're going to chat a little bit more about theology. I'm going to pass it right over to Isaac.
So I'm going to start with some polytheism and some just general theology. Then Pascal's going to talk a bit more about Christian sacrifice and more specific kind of Christian themes. Polytheism, it originates in the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia. The Babylonians, ancient Israel were all kind of polytheists, and that's basically the belief in many gods. There's different forms of that. Sometimes there's one god that ultimately a society would worship. Other times there's lots of little gods, and they're all pretty equal. In the Marvel universe, you would say that Thanos is obviously a lot more powerful god, so he'd be on, he'd be like a Zeus equivalent in Greek mythology or something. Okay. So there's lots of resemblances between the two. Some of the main differences would be the language of heroes and gods. So obviously gods deserve a lot of worship. You see worship a little bit with Thanos and Ebony Maw in some of the opening scenes, and even Thanos' language, he talks about his followers, or even people that he has killed as his children. That's very it's very polytheistic. Otherwise most of the Avengers are more like celebrities and heroes. It's a pretty major difference there. So then just for cosmology in general, we have a quote at the start from Wong, which is pretty handy. He talks about the Infinity Stones, and he basically says,
"At the dawn of the universe, there was nothing. Then, boom! Big Bang sent 6 elemental crystals hurtling across the virgin universe."
Existence. Then he talks about the stones. There's space, reality, power, soul, mind, and time stones. And they're all basic matter, which form the universe, and life comes from that. It's the same with polytheism. In the Babylonian Genesis account, they've got waters at the beginning, and those waters just kind of merge, and from that life emerges. And so it's not very scientific. Theologians will call this primordial stuff. Basically. So the other two forces other than primordial stuff is fate and destiny in the film. Thanos and Thor, they exhibit the most kind of belief in those two things. Obviously, fate isn't something that people worship. It's not a personal being. It doesn't have a will necessarily. It's just kind of this governing force of the universe. For Thanos, it's probably more of a psychological state. I mean, he has a destiny, but it doesn't end up happening. So that's general theology. That's polytheism.
Wow, thanks for covering all of that. And you know what? Actually, when we transition into the New Testament and we look actually at some New Testament theology, the film is actually mentioning Jesus literally. There's a funny scene where Dr. Strange asks Peter Quill, "Hey, all right, let me ask you this one time. What master do you serve?" And Peter Quill answers, "What master do I serve? What am I supposed to say? Jesus? Ha ha ha." It's kind of supposed to be like a funny scene, but however, it's a more cynical mentioning of Jesus. But however, the film puts strong emphasis actually on other virtues Jesus represented in his teachings and in his life on earth, which is the teaching on love and self-sacrifice, which he essentially embodied on a cross when he died for the sins of the world. And in the beginning of the movie, obviously, Avengers find themselves in a really tricky situation where Thanos is on the move to collect all the Infinity Stones, as you guys have established. However, it is in this scene where the Avengers gather, where the undergirding principle of love and sacrifice, which goes through the whole movie, is established. It is when Loki does not shy back actually to try to stab Thanos right in the beginning of the movie, where he knew, oh, it's going to cost his life if he tries to stab and kill Thanos, but he still did it, and in the end he had to pay for that with his life. It is also Wong right in the beginning who explains to Tony Stark, hey, I swore to protect the time stone with my life. And it's just another scene after a few minutes into the movie where another character established, hey, we are willing to sacrifice our life for the purpose to save the universe from Thanos. And it's exactly that what Jesus teaches his disciples when he exhorts them and to love just as he loved them, and he tells them there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friend. And it is exactly this attitude of love the Avengers embody, a willingness to die for their fellow people, to die for the rest of the universe, in order that they might live. And it's the clearest when Vision actually instructs Scarlet, hey, kill me or destroy the Mind Stone which is in my forehead, which he knew it would cost his life, but he was willing to sacrifice his life, as Tiffany mentioned, in order to stop Thanos. And however, the film does also portray a method of sacrifice which is the complete opposite of self-sacrifice, which is a sacrifice that happens out of a selfish intention. And Thanos follows an economy of exchange when he sacrificed Gamora, his daughter. He kills her in order to gain another Infinity Stone, which is the Soul Stone, in order to gain even more power. But this is not a sacrifice which the Avengers approve. They say, no, we don't trade lives. No, we don't sacrifice someone else we love in order to achieve our goal and stop Thanos. But self-sacrifice, the sacrifice Jesus embodied on the cross, is the sacrifice the Avengers embody throughout the movie. And it is ultimately that the film presents exactly that virtue which is at the heart of the gospel of self-sacrifice and love, which is so remarkable that the filmmakers try to choose that in order to portray a hero's journey, a hero's story, just as Jesus did, and as we know the Jesus story, who is our hero who died for the sins of the world in order that the rest can have life.
Guys, thanks so